I moved to Bellwether 3 years ago after my mother passed. It wasn't a decision so much as inertia. Her house was paid off, and I didn't have anywhere else to be. It was one of those towns where people wave when they drive past, even when they don't know you, where the diner staff still remember your order, even if you've only been there once. I'd been picking up work where I could. Substitute teaching mostly, sometimes weekend shifts at the library when the high schoolers flake. No one asked many questions. They liked that I was dependable. I liked that they didn't pry. There was a quiet stillness to this place, a hush that settled behind the curtains. Half the houses were empty, the other half held people who seemed to have calcified their routines. Church on Sunday, groceries on Wednesday, yard work until the first frost, and then radio silence until spring. Sometimes I think the town is like a snow globe someone shook a long time ago. Now all the glitter had settled, and we were just sitting in the stillness, pretending it was still beautiful. That's what made the painting so strange. They held the town's art competition in the converted church hall, same place we used for weddings, funerals, polling days and bake sales. You could still see the old crucifix outline on the far wall, faded where the sun used to hit it before someone painted over it with a coat of beige. I wasn't supposed to be judging. I filled in because the usual guy came down with shingles, and someone remembered I taught high school art for one semester before they cut the budget. They said I had a good eye, which is a polite way of saying I'm quiet and not prone to arguing. Most of the entries were what you'd expect. Oil landscapes of fields following a Bob Ross tutorial, watercolor portraits of dogs that all looked like they were melting. A kid submitted a clay sculpture that collapsed in the box on the way in. I liked that one best. At least it was honest. Then I noticed the butterfly just hanging there. It hadn't been there before. Maybe it was snuck in during the bustle of the event. It was dead center, no name or frame, just canvas and a butterfly. I've seen photorealistic paintings before, hyperrealism, surrealism, digital rendering. This wasn't that. It wasn't just real looking, it was real feeling. That's the only way I can describe it. It looked like it had been pinned there while breathing, and the instant the brush touched it, it forgot how. Its wings were open, blue so deep it made black look loud. The body was textured in a way that made you think about words you hadn't used in years. Velvet, bone, oil. Nothing behind it, just a blank white void, like it had been painted onto the idea of a canvas instead of the thing itself. People started crying. Not everyone, but most. Just here and there. People sniffled behind me. A woman put a hand over her mouth. Even the mayor, the one who always made a point to say how he didn't get art, stood with his hat in his hands, nodding. I stood in front of it for 10, maybe 15 minutes, trying to see what they saw. But nothing came. I felt fine. I wasn't moved like the others were. I felt outside it, like I never got the memo. Eventually, I muttered something. I think it was incredible work or nice piece, and drifted back toward the refreshment table to get some air. That's when I saw Alice. She was standing a few feet from the painting, pale, maybe 17, hoodie with stretched sleeves, scuffed sneakers. She was motionless, eyes locked onto the butterfly. She looked like she'd forgotten how to blink. I watched her longer than I should have. At first, I thought she might have fallen asleep standing up. Then I thought she might be crying. She wasn't doing either, just staring with the same expression I'd seen on a man at his wife's funeral. Not grief exactly, but reverence, like something old was ending, and she'd finally accepted it. I cleared my throat as I approached. "Hey, you alright?" For a moment, she stayed silent, blinking slowly. Then she looked at me, really looked, and said, softly, "I didn't know it could feel like this. I thought I missed my chance." Then she turned back to the butterfly, and I just stood there, not knowing what the hell to say. In the days after the art show, the town felt lighter. That's the only word I could think of. There was no energy in the air, as if someone had gone around in the night and loosened some invisible knot in everyone's chest. People who spent years avoiding each other were suddenly talking again. I saw two brothers, the Whitcomb boys, hugging in the middle of Main Street like one of them had come back from war. Mrs. Halpin brought a pie to her ex-husband's place, and he cried on the porch until she hugged him. The Hendersons, who'd barely spoken since Christmas, were holding hands at the grocery store, smiling like teenagers. Everything felt softened. The whole town had been washed in warm water. Kindness blooming everywhere, fast and quiet, like the way mold creeps into drywall, spreading before you notice it's there. But I wasn't feeling any of it. I kept waiting for whatever hit everyone else to catch up with me, some sense of clarity or relief, or even just a nudge. Instead, it all passed through me like I was made of glass. Even Jacob was different, and he's about as stubborn as they come. I stopped by the garage one afternoon to say hi, and found him leaning back in a lawn chair outside the bay doors, eyes closed, smiling at the sky as if someone was telling him a story only he could hear. "Hey," I said, nudging his boot. "You alright?" He blinked, like I pulled him out of a dream. "Never better," he said. "Feels good, you know, like something finally broke loose." "What did?" I asked. He just laughed, a small, private laugh that made me feel like I'd missed the joke. When I asked him about the painting, he smiled again and said, "It was something, wasn't it?" He looked past me, like something across the street was calling him. I turned to look. Nothing was there. I walked home, feeling hollow. It wasn't just the painting that bothered me now. It was me. Why hadn't I reacted like everyone else? What was wrong with me that I could look at that thing everyone else treated like a revelation, and feel absolutely nothing? That question kept bothering me long after I got home. Later that evening, as I was locking up the school after a PTA meeting, I heard footsteps echoing down the hall. It was Alice, wearing the same hoodie with the same distant stare. But this time, her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes had that shimmering look I'd seen on half the town. She stopped in front of me, breathing like she'd run all the way here. "I didn't think you would choose me," she whispered. Her hands were trembling, but she didn't seem scared. More like she was overwhelmed. "I haven't even told her I love her yet." "Who?" I asked. She glanced past me, toward the doorway. Another girl, tall, blonde, one of the basketball kids, was standing there, staring into the dim hallway with the same dreamy, softened expression most of the town had been wearing. Alice didn't answer my question. She didn't need to. She just smiled, small and shaking, and said again, "I didn't think you would choose me." I started noticing the gaps. That's how it felt, like blank spaces in a song everyone else had learned the lyrics to. People would speak in low, tender tones like they were sharing something sacred. But every so often, I'd see someone watching from a distance, unmoved, out of step, like me. The first was the man in the rusted car behind the hardware store. I'd seen him before, sure. Just one of those forgotten fixtures you stop noticing until you have a reason to. He never begged or spoke, just sat in the front seat of that sun-bleached Buick, windows fogged from the inside, watching the world pass. After the painting, the town shifted, softened like overripe fruit. But he didn't change at all. He just sat there, a statue in denim and dust. Once I passed close enough to catch his eyes through the glass. He was staring straight ahead, unblinking, as if waiting for a radio signal only he could hear. I raised a hand in an awkward half wave. He didn't return it, just kept staring. Then there was the widow, Mrs. Laurie, who walked the cemetery each morning before dawn. Always the same path, the same 3 headstones. Her husband, her son, and someone else I didn't recognize. Most mornings, I saw her from my kitchen window, dark coat trailing behind her like smoke, hands buried deep in her sleeves. After the butterfly showed up, I started watching more closely, wondering if, like everyone else, she'd stop to stare at strangers with those new, gentle smiles. But she didn't. She moved the same way, slow and ritualistic. She never looked up. I tried catching her eye one morning, brought her coffee in a paper cup. She didn't take it, just looked at me like I was interrupting a conversation I couldn't hear. And then there was Nathan. He ran the post office, usually polite, efficient, and dry as toast. I didn't know much about him, beyond the story everyone knew. He had been alone his whole life, never found a partner in this small town. In the week after the painting, when couples danced barefoot in the park and strangers confessed decades of buried affection, Nathan still walked his usual loop with mail tucked tight to his chest, jaw locked shut like he was keeping something from escaping. I thought for a second there might be something between us, some shared understanding, like war vets who never served in the same war, but still recognized the look in each other's eyes. I tried to speak to him once, a throwaway line about how strange everything had gotten. He paused, nodded once, and walked away. The others didn't speak at all, barely above the bare minimum for conversation. I wondered if this is how I looked the whole time I was here. To me, I was laying low, being inoffensive. Was I just as sour as the others not chosen? I kept wondering if it was a coincidence, or if we were all missing the same piece. Something simple, something everyone else had that made them worthy of whatever this was. Eventually, I stopped one morning when I saw Mrs. Laurie sitting in the church pews. She wasn't praying, just sitting, facing the blank wall where the painting had been. I sat a few rows behind her, let the silence stretch between us until I couldn't take it anymore. "Why aren't you like the others?" I asked, my voice barely carried across the empty room. She didn't look back, just shifted her gaze slightly upward toward the ceiling beam. Because, she said softly, there's no one left for me. It wasn't bitter, wasn't sad even. It was just the truth. And suddenly, the space inside my chest felt colder than it had all week. It started with the lights. People standing on their porches, faces lit by candles they hadn't held seconds before. I saw the first group from my window around midnight. 6 of them, walking single file down Main Street. They weren't speaking, but they were humming something low and wordless. Not a melody I recognized. It sounded more like a memory passed mouth to mouth. The next night, there were more. Couples holding hands, parents with children, teenagers moving like they'd rehearsed the steps in some school auditorium long ago and just now remembered the choreography. They didn't look possessed. That's the part I kept coming back to. There was no glassiness in their eyes, no twitching or convulsing, no signs of strain. They looked grateful, calm, like they were doing exactly what they were meant to do. Alice was with them. She walked barefoot through the grass, arms loose at her sides, her face tilted up to the stars like she expected to be lifted at any moment. She looked so alive, it hurt to watch her. I followed some nights, stayed far enough back to pretend I wasn't spying. They never turned around, never acknowledged me. Then, on the 4th night, I saw the dancers. Middle of the town square, a man and a woman, twirling slowly in the pool of light beneath a lamppost, their bodies close enough that you couldn't tell whose feet were leading. The man's shirt was soaked with something. I thought it was rain at first, but then I saw the dark streak trailing down from his eye. Blood. A slow, steady trickle, like a tear that got tired. No one seemed alarmed. People walked past without blinking. One man even clapped, as if it were a performance. That's when I started writing it all down. Not for posterity, for sanity. I needed to make it make sense. Dates, names, times, descriptions. How many people, what they did, how long it lasted. But the more I tried to track it, the worse it got. It was like trying to trace smoke with a pencil. I gathered all my notes, thoughts and theories and went straight to the authorities. But no matter how much I urged them to action, the sheriff just stared through me, a soft smile on his face. I think what angered me was how sincere it was. He wasn't mocking me, gone to whatever was going on. Nothing added up. I stopped writing and just watched. One night, I saw Alice sitting alone at the edge of the pond, her reflection trembling in the water. I decided to speak to her. She looked up when I got close, smiled, soft and tired. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. Her smile didn't falter. She stood, gently. Then she reached out and touched my cheek. Not with pity, but with something that felt like an apology. "It must be so lonely," she whispered, "to have no one worth blooming for." And then she walked into the dark. And I just stood there, still not understanding whether she was trying to comfort me or mourn me. I went back to the church, looking for Mrs. Lowry. I don't know why. Maybe because she was the only one who ever answered me without smiling like she knew something I didn't. Or maybe because I still believed, stupidly, that there were a few of us left who hadn't changed and were still sane. The doors were open. Candles lined the pews like sentries, wax pulled onto hymn books no one was reading. I found her sitting in the same spot she always did, back straight, hands folded. I sat beside her, close enough that I could hear the quiet creak of her breath. She didn't look at me, not right away, just kept her gaze fixed on the far wall. I turned toward her. "What is it?" I asked. "What does it want?" She smiled. That was the first thing that told me something was wrong. It wasn't bitter or distant or hollow. It was radiant, lit from within, the way they all were once it touched them. Then she said, so softly I almost missed it. "It finds what still aches," she whispered. "That's all it needs. A wound you've grown used to holding." Her voice had changed too, in cadence, like it had been set to music I couldn't hear. She finally turned to look at me, and for a moment I thought she might take my hand. But instead, she just said, "You never learned how to ache, did you?" Then she stood, slow and graceful, and walked up the center aisle, her fingers brushing each pew like a rosary. She had found the ache, and I was alone, again. And now I couldn't even trust the silence I shared with her. The others, the ones like me, had thinned out. The man in the Buick was gone. His car sat empty, door left ajar like he'd stepped out for a moment and forgotten where he was going. Nathan had closed the post office early 3 days in a row. No one complained. I stopped by once and saw him through the back window, holding something small, but I couldn't shake the fact that it looked like a weapon. I kept wandering around like a tourist in my own life, watching, listening, wondering if it was too late to be chosen, wondering if I'd missed whatever subtle invitation had passed through everyone else's blood. One night, I found myself at the edge of the park, just beyond the lights. Couples walked barefoot in the grass. Teenagers sat in circles, head bowed, foreheads pressed together. You could hear quiet songs, not full melodies, just threads of harmony rising and falling in time with the breeze. I sat alone on a bench and tried to mimic it. The closeness, the warmth. I imagined someone sitting next to me. I tried to picture what it might feel like to have a memory that made your chest hurt in that beautiful, horrible way. But there was nothing there. It was like trying to start a fire with wet wood. Later, at the cafe, I ran into Maya. I hadn't seen her in years, not since she graduated. She'd drawn quiet, strange things that made the other students nervous. Now she was older, settled, but still had that look, like she was always 5 seconds ahead of the rest of us. She offered me a seat. We talked, lightly at first, then slower. At some point, I told her everything, not just about the painting or the others, but the hollowness, the fact that I'd been watching all of it from the outside, like a man pressing his face to the glass of a house he used to live in. She listened, really listened. Then she looked at me with something like sympathy, something like pity. "I think you want to be in love," she said, "but you never learned how." I didn't argue. She sipped her coffee, set it down, and added, "And I think you don't want to be alone when it happens. When what happens? I asked. She silently looked out the window at the people walking in pairs, bathed in amber light, faces turned up toward a sky I hadn't been able to look at directly in days. It wasn't quiet anymore, not in the way it used to be. The stillness of a town half forgotten, where dust settled on windshields and dogs barked at nothing. Now the silence felt intentional, sacred, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next note in a song they'd only heard in dreams. They'd started looking up more. It was subtle at first, heads tilted just slightly toward the sky, as if something faint was humming above the clouds. But now, people sat in fields at night, eyes wide open, mouths parted. Couples lay naked on blankets, fingers threaded together, whispering things I couldn't hear. They said they were ready. I found drawings scratched onto the bark of trees, crude spirals, insect wings, symbols that looked like musical notation but didn't follow any rhythm I knew. Behind the library, someone stacked bones in a perfect spiral. Bird bones maybe, or squirrels, or something that once spoke. A few houses had windows open and candlelight flickering like hearts beating in sync. I passed one porch where letters were being burned, one by one, into a metal basin. Love notes, I think, or maybe confessions. No one seemed afraid. Except me. I found Jacob outside the old grocery store. He was standing still, head tilted back, his hand resting gently on the cart handle, like he'd forgotten he was there. "Jacob," I said too loud, "come with me." He blinked slowly, then smiled, that same warm, distant smile everyone wore now. "Come where?" "Away," I said. "Just out of town, anywhere, a day even, just to see if it breaks whatever this is." His smile didn't falter, but his eyes showed signs of mourning. "Please," I said. "I don't know what's happening, but it's not right. It's not—" He stepped forward and put a hand on my shoulder. There was real pain in his face, sorrow of something I had no knowledge of, like I was in the wrong for thinking this. "You're not being punished, Darren. You're just not part of it." That hurt more than I expected, because there wasn't a drip of malice. It was pure truth, and truth doesn't bruise, it carves. He turned and walked back inside, leaving me with nothing but the sound of insects buzzing in rhythm I swear I'd never heard before. That night, I walked to the edge of town. There's an overlook where the grass gives way to gravel, and you can see the train tracks disappear into nothing. That's where I saw them. Two people, a man and a woman, sitting on a guardrail. I recognized them both. Neither had changed. They were like me, always had been, watching things from the outside. They weren't speaking, just holding hands, like it was the last rope tying them to something real. Then the woman began to cry, not from pain or fear, from relief. And the man, he smiled, just barely, but it was the start of a smile that comes from surrendering to something beautiful you were once terrified of. I watched, heart hammering, as they began to succumb to the phenomenon. And for the first time since this all began, I felt something split in me. Grief. Because whatever they were becoming, it was never meant for me. It happened just before dawn. I hadn't slept, not in days really, just drifted in and out of hours like a body floating on cold water. I'd been walking the town again, hoping the movement would give my mind something to grip. But when I turned onto Main Street, I knew something had changed. They were standing still. All of them, the changed, frozen mid-step, mid-conversation, mid-breath. A couple sat on a bench, foreheads touching. A teenager stood on a porch with a book half open in her hands. The mayor was parked at a stoplight, door ajar, his head tilted toward the sky. None of them moved. Their eyes were wide and wet, the expression you see in old church paintings, mouths parted just slightly, as if they were hearing something so beautiful they couldn't survive the sound. I stood in the center of the square, surrounded. The air felt thick, like it was vibrating just out of tune with reality. My ears rang from the pressure. Something was happening. Something was here. They looked up. Every single one of them, in perfect unison, tilted their heads toward the sky. Not in panic, but in recognition. Whatever they'd been waiting for had finally arrived. And then they began to bloom. It started with a shiver, a ripple through the crowd like a breath held and released at once. Shoulders loosened, mouths parted, eyes softened, something pulling at them from somewhere very far away. Then, the first tear opened. I saw it happen to a man near the fountain. A thin, perfect line splitting down the center of his chest, as gentle as if someone had unzipped a coat. There was no struggle, no gasp. His skin just parted. The flesh eased back on its own, curling outward. Muscle followed. It slid out in long, warm ribbons, thick, glistening strands peeling away from bone like silk loosened from a spool. Each sheet slowed downward with soft, wet sounds, layering itself at his feet. His heart sat exposed for a moment, pulsing like a bright stone. Then, it softened too. Around me, the rest of the town began to open. I could hear it. That quiet peeling, that almost tender separation of skin from the living thing inside. It didn't sound violent, more like fruit being opened by steady hands. A woman's face split along a jawline, a child's spine pushed free in a slow arc, vertebra by vertebra. A man's arms shed their muscles in draped sheets, leaving the pale gleam of bone beneath. None of them screamed. They didn't even flinch. Their tendons stretched like strings being pulled taut, then snapped with little pops, playful in how small they sounded compared to the enormity of what was happening. Fingers loosened from knuckles, cheeks peeled from skulls, ribs unfolded like petals. There was no blood, not a drop. Everything emptied itself cleanly, quietly, as if their bodies had been waiting for this, as if the machinery of being human had turned off its alarms and unlocked all its doors. And through all of it, their expressions, God, they looked euphoric. A woman whose eyes were already clouding over smiled like someone had just told her she could finally go home. A teenage boy leaned into his friend as his sternum opened, and they both laughed, breathless and relieved, before their laughter dissipated. Couples held hands as their bodies melted. Parents stroked their children's hair even as their own faces fell away. Some closed their eyes, others raised their arms to the sky as if embracing something descending toward them. No one ran, no one begged, no one tried to stop it. They welcomed it. Spines collapsed into soft white powder, skulls folded inward like drying paper, bones crumbled at the slightest breeze, becoming dust before they even touched the ground. I stood there and watched it all, watched the town peel itself open and spill into the air like light escaping a cracked shell. And something in me twisted, painfully, not from the horror, but from the unbearable truth threading through every smile, every sigh, every peaceful surrender of the body. They were happy. Every single one of them. Happy in a way I had never been. And suddenly I understood I never could be. And that, more than the skin and the bones and the dust swirling in the dawn light, was what shattered me. Then something rose from the center of the stillness, a shimmer at first, like oil on water, like air warping over pavement on a hot day. Then wings, massive, translucent, veined like stained glass, a body that flickered between forms I couldn't hold on to, not long enough to name, eyes like multifaceted mirrors, a head that never stopped turning. It wasn't the butterfly from the painting. That had just been a door. This was what had been waiting behind it. It rose from their remains, built from them somehow. Not their flesh, but what had been inside it. Love, familial, partnership, desire, all of it, shaped and refracted into something too beautiful to be real. It flew, soundless, weightless. It drifted over rooftops, trailing sparks of gold behind it, like the last light of a dying sun. It passed above me, and did not touch me, didn't even pause. I stood, I shouted. "I'm here," I said. "I'm still here." It didn't slow. I saw them, I watched, I understand now. Still, nothing. I dropped to my knees, coughing in the dust. My hands trembled, flecks of bone and ash clinging to my skin like snow. I tried to cry, but the tears didn't come. I tried to pray, but my voice was hollow. I tried to plead, but I had no one to plead for. Just me. And for the first time, it hit me all at once. All the quiet years, all the nice dinners, all the polite, acceptable small talk, all the chances I'd had to love someone, to ache for someone, to need, and how I'd missed every one. I collapsed into the ash, completely from emptiness. I whispered into the remains of 1,000 open hearts. I'm still here. I'm still me. Why? And the dust stirred around me, just faintly. And I heard it, from inside, like something had cracked open in the back of my skull, just wide enough to let the words in. Because there's nothing in you to transform. And then the wind blew, and the ashes of the ones I never knew how to love scattered into the morning. They found me 3 days later. I was still sitting there in the square, half buried in ash. It had settled into my hair, into the folds of my clothes, into the cracks of my palms. I don't think I moved the entire time. Maybe I slept, maybe I didn't. The days blur when there's no one left to tell you that time is passing. When the rescue crews arrived, boots crunching through what used to be neighbors and classmates and people I borrowed jumper cables from, I didn't react. A man knelt in front of me, asking questions, my name, if I was okay, what I remembered. But his voice was muffled, sounding like he was speaking from underwater. I kept staring at the ground. The dust shifted every time I breathed, little clouds lifting, swirling, falling again. If I stared long enough, I could almost imagine faces in it. Not their faces, just the impression of all the love they carried, hovering for a moment, before dissolving again. Eventually, someone asked, "What happened here?" I thought about lying, or saying I didn't know, but the truth rose in my throat before I could stop it. "They were loved," I said, my voice cracked. "That's why they got to leave." The man frowned at me. To him, it was nonsense. And maybe it was, but it was the only thing that made sense to me anymore. They weren't killed. They became something they had always been reaching toward. And I didn't. In the days that followed, they kept me in a hospital an hour out of town. Clean sheets, tiled floors, a window that looked out over fields that had never known what happened in Bellwether. Nurses came and went. The psychiatrist sat by my bed and tried to get me to talk about trauma and mass hysteria. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Alice's smile, opening like a second sunrise, Jacob lifting his head to the sky as if greeting an old friend, the way couples held each other as their bodies unspooled into light. They weren't afraid, they weren't alone, they weren't left behind. That last one hurt the most. Because somewhere beneath the horror and the dust and the quiet, gnawing loneliness, something else had taken root in me, something I didn't want to name. I was jealous that they had someone, anyone, whose love reached deep enough that it could echo into whatever came next. I didn't. And that was why I remained. People keep calling me lucky. They say I survived, that I was spared. But every night, when the lights dim, I lie awake in that hospital bed and wonder about the truth of it, the sharp, aching contradiction. If they're gone and I'm alive, I have another chance at love. But if I never had it to begin with, if no one ever felt that way about me, if I never felt it toward anyone, then is it even possible with this second chance? And if I did somehow learn to live this feeling, would I be whisked up into the sky? Or was that all just a one-off? Some mornings, I hope the answer will come. Other mornings, I hope it won't. Because the world feels wrong with this knowledge. Too quiet, too flat, like someone drained all the colour or turned off the part of the sky that used to watch back. And sometimes, When I'm honest with myself, I wonder whether they were the lucky ones, the ones who got to bloom, the ones who got to go, the ones who weren't left behind to figure out how to start loving in a world that suddenly feels too big, too empty, and too late. But I'm still here. I'm still me. Maybe that means something. Maybe it means nothing at all.
the clarity of this story, I must mention that I have a hearing disability that has made me hard of hearing. I know that there are some things in life that I'll never understand, but I still look back on this experience wondering what could have happened and what I should have done differently. This all happened around a year ago. The holiday season had just rolled by, and I was settling down from traveling and all the get-togethers with family and friends. I live in a small suburban neighborhood that borders a forest in southern Quebec. It's a quiet area, as most of the residents are familiar with each other, which I honestly kind of prefer as it adds a warmer atmosphere. Around winter, I like to take my dog Monty on walks in the local forest. He's a Rottweiler Husky mix, which is perfect for me since I enjoy going for runs from time to time. The forest has several trails, none of which are challenging for non-hikers. I remember it being an afternoon. I had just finished having a late lunch and decided to burn the calories on a walk with Monty. As usual, my dog goes ballistic when we turn the corner on my street towards the forest entrance. It was relatively cold for a February day. A fresh blanket of snow lined the paths overnight, creating this nearly blank canvas. As usual, I let my dog off the leash so he could run around. There were a few yellow patches along with some boot prints in the snow, which signaled to me that several people had already taken their dogs out earlier. Most people like to go on walks before noon since the sun tends to set around 4 p.m., so I didn't expect to see anybody out at that time. After walking for around 30 minutes, we came to a fork in the path. I noticed that one of the paths hadn't been walked yet, so feeling semi-adventurous, I decided to take it. I have a pretty concrete memory of the trails, so I knew exactly where I was going. The trail led to a clearing, which was great, since I wanted to check out the native birds with the binoculars I had gotten for Christmas. I remember scanning the surroundings until I saw a strange shape along the tree line in the distance. When I focused my binoculars, I saw a blue tarp and what looked to be a makeshift shelter. As curious as I was to check it out, it was getting dark, and I wanted to get home. Turning around, Monty and I started walking back. As usual, he ran up ahead, but something seemed off in his behavior. He was much more alert and was sniffing the trail more than he normally would from what I observed in the past. When I looked down at the trail, my eyes widened. There was a set of footprints in the snow, much larger than my own. I remember turning my boots over out of sheer confusion to compare them to the ones in the snow. The prints were different, which left me with even more questions. There were no other forks in the trail, so whoever took it had to have passed me at some point. I figured they must have passed me while I was using my binoculars. At the time, it seemed like the most logical explanation, so I tried not to overthink it. At this point, it was significantly darker outside, but I could still make out my surroundings. As we were walking back, Monty stopped abruptly and started barking relentlessly in my direction. As I turned around, that's when I saw him. There was a man, probably around 6'4", wearing charcoal-colored snow pants and a white camo jacket only about a meter away from me. He didn't make any movements towards me. He just stood there with his hands in his coat pockets. I didn't recognize him from anybody in the neighborhood, so I assumed he must have been a hiker or someone from out of town. He looked like he was muttering something to me, but I couldn't read his lips due to the lack of lighting and not knowing if he was speaking English or French, which are the two commonly spoken languages in Quebec. I felt like an idiot at that moment for not bringing my phone with me, so I ended up trying to communicate with him that I was hard of hearing and that it was getting late. I got back home around 4:30. By then, it was completely dark out. I remember following my standard night routine, not really thinking much about the encounter, but in the middle of the night, something happened that still shakes me to this day. I woke up to Monty licking my hand, which is something he usually does to get me out of bed in the morning. I tapped my phone to check the time, and to my surprise, it was 3 a.m. I noticed a message from my neighbor asking if everything was all right, which, if I'm being honest, confused me at first. The message was a few minutes old and asked if everything was all right since Monty had been barking like he was possessed. I looked up from my phone to see that Monty was no longer in my room. I walked downstairs to find him barking hysterically at the patio door. As I approached the door, I struggled to see anything with my vision still blurry. I tried to focus my eyes when the motion sensor light turned on. At that moment, my heart sank. The man from the forest was standing there in my backyard. I didn't think twice to process any more questions. I stepped away from the door and texted 911. I don't think I've ever texted 911 faster than I did that night. I ran up to my room with Monty and grabbed the machete from under my bed. I'm a shorter woman with a background in martial arts, but I know damn well that the best move in a fight is to not fight at all. I sat there in my room guarding Monty and myself until the police came. With my heart beating out of my chest, I sat opposite from the door with Monty by my side. It didn't last long until Monty sprang up and started barking violently at the bedroom door. My hands were sweating profusely as I watched a shadow cast in from underneath the door. The movement in front of the nightlight suggested the man was seconds from breaking into my room. Those had to be the longest minutes of my life, as I anticipated the door handle turning or the door completely breaking in. Luckily for me, it never did. When the police arrived, I explained everything to them while they searched the property. The glass on the patio was smashed completely, but besides that, nothing was missing and everything was still relatively the same. The police found the gate in my backyard open. It leads to the forest, which is where they believe the man disappeared to. I let them know about the shelter I saw in the woods the day before. I took Monty and some of my belongings to stay with a family friend for a few days while I got the patio door fixed. I never got a follow-up from the police after the incident, but ever since that day, I decided to stick to roads when walking my dog, not trying to think too much about the incident. My name is Emberlay, and I'm a 16-year-old girl who lives in Illinois with my younger sister Kate, who's 15. My dad works for a deforestation group about 30 minutes from our house. It was a normal morning on December 5th as my sister and I were getting ready to go out to the movies. We decided to go watch a somewhat new horror movie, Terrifier 3, which had some Christmas stuff included in it. We all knew it was 18 plus, but nobody paid much attention. Plus, we looked older than we were anyway. We made our way to the movies and easily got in thanks to our appearance. However, halfway through the film, as everyone was anticipating the next scene, my phone buzzed loudly enough for the whole theater to hear, which really killed everyone's vibe as they all turned toward me with annoyed looks. My sister and I scurried out until I tripped, which was embarrassing enough. After we exited the theater, I checked my phone to see who called me. It was my dad, but instead of calling back, I received a text message that said something like, "Hey, would you mind bringing me some lunch since the small cafe in the woods is shut today?" I looked over at Kate, and she looked at me confused, but neither of us second-guessed the message since it seemed normal. We arrived home, packed some food for him, and took my car downtown to the woods. I've always loved that place and never felt uneasy there because it was large and secluded. The scenery was amazing, with a hill that led down to a lake perfect for fishing and photos. After a while, Kate and I got out of the car, and we walked down the path through the woods. I took out my phone to call my dad, but he didn't pick up. Confused, I looked over at Kate, who was just as confused as I was. Why wouldn't he respond when he just called us at the movies? I decided to message him instead, reminding him that we were at the woods to give him his lunch. After a few moments, I saw the 3 little dots on the screen appear, showing he was typing. He responded by telling us to walk down the small hill and wait for him at the lake, which we followed. The sun was slowly setting since it was winter, so sunset came much earlier. The sky had a beautiful radiant orange glow over the hill and down the mountain. Snapping out of my thoughts, Kate pointed down to the lake where a man in black was sitting on the deck by the water with his back to us. We guessed it was our dad. We walked down a bit more and stopped a little behind him. I called out his name, but he didn't move. Kate grew uneasy, and her attitude made the scene even more eerie. I slowly pulled off the hood he was wearing and revealed a man who definitely wasn't our dad. Kate and I shrieked as he turned around and began waving my dad's phone around like a maniac, smiling like he was happy to see us scared. I blurted out asking why he was using our dad's phone, but he didn't respond. Instead, he lunged and grabbed Kate's arm as she screamed. Luckily, I was strong enough to pull her away, and we started running as fast as we could. The adrenaline pushed through us so much that I had never seen either of us run that fast. Behind me, I heard stomps getting closer, so I knew we were being chased. I didn't dare to turn around. Finally, we reached the car. I slammed the door shut and locked it as the man came to my window, then crouched down out of sight as I reversed and sped away back home. When we got home, my dad and mom were there. We arrived panting out of breath and explained the whole situation to them. My dad was furious and said his phone had been stolen while he was working, so he decided to come back home. He said the man must have taken his phone and messaged us. My dad called the police and filed the report. They used the IMEI number to track the device, which was still on the deck by the lake, and they returned the phone to my dad. They said there wasn't much they could do since the phone was already found. I thought this was the end of it, but I wouldn't be telling this if it was. 6 hours later, around 1 a.m., I got an unknown message that said, "I like that your house is lit only by your bedroom TV." I immediately went cold and pale. I paused the TV and heard rustling outside my window. My room was on the second floor. I shut my phone and listened. Slowly, I peeked through the blinds and saw the man smiling with a gun pointed at my window. I screamed and pulled away as glass shattered everywhere across my room. My parents ran in, followed by Kate. I screamed for them to crouch and told them the man was outside with a gun. When my dad went to check, the man was gone. Then we heard another loud bang and more glass breaking downstairs in the kitchen. We ran and locked the bedroom as Kate called 911. My mom hugged us as we cried in fear. Throughout the whole situation, I kept wondering how he knew where we lived. A few moments later, the police arrived and searched the whole house, but nobody was there. Kate and I explained the situation again, and one of the officers said they should check the car. Surprisingly, a small AirTag was found on my tire, which explained how the man knew where we lived and why he crouched before I sped out of the woods. The police told us they would patrol the streets and do everything they could to find the man. A few months later, he still hadn't been found, but he never returned, which I hope it stays that way. Me, Kate, and my parents are still traumatized by the situation, but mostly I felt stupid as the older sister for not being alarmed when the person didn't respond to calls and only responded through texts. All I know is that I'll be more careful and never go to secluded places again, especially when I'm responsible for someone else's safety. It was 2021. One word to describe my day: hectic. Work was a shit show. This was prime COVID time, so I was working from home. I was supposed to be meeting with my extended family upstate, and I ended up finally getting off a nearly 3-hour Zoom meeting for work a whole hour and a half after everyone else had already arrived at my parents' house. And that didn't include the next 2 hours or so the trek up to their house would take me. I filled up 2 cups of coffee in my kitchen to take with me before leaving. God knew I'd need them. The second I opened my front door, I realized this drive would be more of a shit show than I had originally thought. The snow and wind had already picked up since earlier that evening, and the streets were barely even plowed. The ground had at least 2 feet of snow already, and it was supposed to snow like this for a majority of the night. I had to be driving under 25 on most residential roads. My car at the time was also a really old, crappy Hyundai, which wasn't ideal for extreme weather conditions at all. It didn't have anti-lock brakes either. I'm a fast driver though, so when I got on the highway, I raised my speed to 70, which was probably a lot faster than safe for the conditions. I finally arrived at my parents' house around 9. They had begun dinner without me, but thankfully weren't too far along. A few drinks and gift sharing later, I started to lose track of time. I got so caught up in seeing my relatives I hadn't spoken to in a while that I ended up basically forgetting I still have to drive home, even as most of my family had started to leave. Once I finally got in my car to leave, it was past midnight, and at least another foot of snow had accumulated on the ground. I was buzzed, but I figured I was sober enough to drive home. Not that I condone drinking and driving at all. I was tired and simply wanted to get home. As I was heading towards the highway, I realized the roads were completely dead. I made the grave mistake of raising my speed to 40 down one particular road, because as I began to approach a bend in the road, I realized my car had gone into a skid. I tried not to panic, as this wasn't the first time I'd skidded. I started to steer into the skid and downshifted, but as I got even closer to the curve, and my car still wasn't slowing down, I started to panic. My car went straight off the side of the road and into a tree, and the airbag deployed. I was momentarily in shock from the force of the impact, but thankfully, I was relatively unscathed. My car was ruined though. The whole hood was buried in a bank of snow surrounding the tree I hit. No chance I was pushing it back onto the road or anything like that. The first thing I did was phone my roadside assistance company, and they said they'd send a truck to my location, but because of the horrible conditions, it could take up to 40 minutes for the truck to reach me. I was on a deserted road surrounded by forest and no houses for miles in either direction, so I decided to also call my parents and ask one of them to drive over and wait with me. My dad said he'd get in his car and drive over, so then I hung up and waited. As I was sitting there, I began to hear something over the sound of the wind howling outside. There were undeniably footsteps in the snow. I couldn't tell exactly from where, but they sounded somewhat distant. I opened the driver's side door and stepped out, looking over the roof of my car. I wasn't hearing footsteps anymore. Instead, I was hearing some new sounds. It was kind of hard to describe, but it sounded like some kind of wet slurping. I looked over to where I thought the sound was coming from, and I could see some movement by the tree line. It was dark as hell though, but I was pretty certain I was looking at a person. I called out, "Hello?" The sound stopped, but no one called back. I sat there for a few more seconds awkwardly, but no one ever responded or appeared to me. I couldn't see any more movement either. I was officially freaked out, so I got back in my car and locked the doors. What couldn't have been a whole minute later, I heard footsteps in the snow again outside. Then I heard something hitting the passenger side window, like a rock or something was thrown at it. I couldn't see out the passenger side window because it was covered in snow, or any of the windows for that matter. Once again, I opened the driver's side door and stepped out of my car. Checking my immediate surroundings, I made a disturbing discovery. There were boot prints in the snow, circling all around my car, and then leading away from my passenger side door into the woods. I felt sick to my stomach. I also noticed there were drops of blood in the snow. I opened my driver's side door and then grabbed my 9mm out of the glove compartment. Clutching it in my right hand, I began to follow the prints leading into the woods. At that moment, I was convinced someone out there was with me. As I followed the prints, the drops of blood began to grow larger. It looked like someone had been bleeding profusely. And then, I saw some dark mass lying in the snow just past the tree line. I couldn't tell what it was. I was just praying it wasn't a person. I took out my phone and enabled the flashlight. It wasn't a person. It was a dead deer, seemingly slaughtered by some larger predatory animal. The stomach was ripped completely open, and shockingly, the deer had been completely decapitated. I swept the flashlight over the surrounding few feet, but I didn't see the head anywhere. I decided this was getting too weird for me, and I started heading back to my car. I got back to my car and opened the driver's side door, and as soon as I did, it was all I could do to keep myself from vomiting on the spot. Lying in the driver's side seat of my car was the severed head of a deer, placed on the seat as if it was looking right at me. I booked it out of there and made it a few minutes down the road before headlights appeared in the distance. I ran towards the car, waving my hands and shouting like a madman, still holding my handgun. Thankfully, it was my dad, and he stopped the car and asked me what the hell I was doing. I got in the passenger seat and explained everything to him, and I kid you not, he literally didn't believe me. I felt more comfortable going back to my car with my dad now, so he drove the two of us over there and we got out. The footprints were still all around my car, but the deer head was gone. All that remained was a large spot of blood on my driver's side seat. I think once my dad saw that, he started to believe me. The deer corpse was also gone. All that remained were drag marks in the snow. The tow truck finally showed up, and he towed my car. My dad asked me if I wanted to call the police, but honestly, I just didn't have the energy to file a police report. I was exhausted and just wanted to go to sleep. I figured calling the police wouldn't accomplish jack anyways. So that's my story. I have no idea who was in the woods that night and what they wanted. Maybe they were just trying to scare me, or maybe they had worse intentions.